When I retired from the police in 2013, after a full 30-year term, I treated myself. Now this is because 1, I believed I'd earned it, and 2, for once I had the money. The reason I had the money was because police pensions are, well, they were then, very good, and a substantial commuted lump sum was made available to all officers upon retirement. The reason these pensions were so good was not because of a universal act of generosity from the taxpayer, but because we'd all paid in an eye-wateringly high proportion of our salaries every month over a lifetime of service. For me, this was the payback for working through the night with our necks on the line on many a Christmas and weekend when most other people were either at home or out in the pubs and clubs enjoying themselves. It was a way of life I chose. I don't expect any plaudits, nor do I expect any opprobrium. It was my path in life, and that's that. So it was then that in July of 2013, on my 51st birthday, I walked into Alan Jeffrey's BMW Motorrad, not far from home, and proudly announced to the salesman, "I want the top of the range model of your top of the range bike, please." He gave me a look of moderate surprise, and I'm sure I detected a raised eyebrow. I'd had a few years break from riding towards the end of my service, and the last bike I'd ridden was my old and trusty Honda ST1100 Pan-European. I explained this fact to him and was promptly steered towards the imposing looking, brand new, unregistered, just in BMW K1600 GTL in damask red. "That's the top dog," he said, giving me a slightly quizzical look, which seemed for all the world to be saying, "Are you sure you've thought this through?" Well, of course I hadn't. That is beyond the fact that I was going to have the biggest and best, and to hell with the logic. So after taking myself out on a demonstrator and convincing myself that I needed to try nothing else from their massive range of Beamers, and trying not to visibly flinch at the "fully loaded, it's £18,000 sir," I agreed to do the deal. "What sort of finance arrangements will you be taking out, and do you have a trade-in, sir?" Now, just days before, my own staff had been calling me sir as a discipline requirement from my team of constables and sergeants, so I probably overlooked the professionalism that the salesman no doubt believed himself to be an exemplar of, and this may well have come across as the sort of condescending indifference often displayed by the rich and powerful to lesser mortals. I was neither, and nothing could have been further from the truth. "Cash purchase, no trade-in," I announced, and I do confess to the employment of some subtle histrionics here, because I knew full well that this moment had never come before and would likely never come again. So after filling in the usual forms, I gingerly inserted my debit card into the reader and tapped in my PIN. I was expecting the "call bank" response, as was the salesman, and after a cosy chat with NatWest and several security checks came that exhilarating response, "Transaction approved, please hand to merchant." I swear at this point that there was a look of both relief and surprise on the guy's face. I rode home the 3 miles on my new pride and joy. You know, I had that bike for just over 3 years and covered 14,000 miles. And in spite of it bulging with electronics, it never missed a beat, not the slightest glitch. I dropped it twice from stationery. The first time it cost me £2,500 and a month off road. That's BMW cosmetics for you. The second time I'd fitted crash bars front and rear, and there wasn't a scratch on it anywhere. £275 well spent, eh? But it was always the wrong choice, and I soon realised that this bike's singular lack of character was leaving me cold. And so I sold it by way of auction on eBay for £12,500, and that was £2.5 more than the dealership had offered me in part exchange for a new GS Adventure. It turned out that the winning bidder was a Latvian doctor with a name something like Voldemort. And at first I was convinced this was another of those eBay prankster bidders. They're still out there, you know. I asked him to give me a call so I could use my best copper's instincts to wrong-foot him and call him out. But when I answered the phone and a deep, booming voice proclaimed, "Here speaks Voldemort," I all but collapsed. And he rode up. Cutting a long story short, he rocked up the following day with £12,500 in £50 notes. I know, don't ask. So this experience from 10 years ago got me thinking. I'm sure that over a lifetime of owning and riding motorcycles, we've all got our fair share of regrets. Bikes we've moved on and sorely missed, and bikes we've bought, often on impulse, which turned out to be something of a disappointment with the passage of time. This is largely the nature of things for those of us on a never-ending quest to find the perfect bike. The bike which will invoke soaring waves of ownership pride, have a perfect balance of power and handling, deliver enduring reliability, have Venus-like aesthetics, perfectly fit our budget in terms of both the initial capital outlay and subsequent running costs. And while we're on the subject of money, let's not forget rates of depreciation. You know, residuals and all that. But hang on, that's irrelevant, surely, as the perfect bike will never be parted company with. But of course it will. Because in our minds, an even more perfect bike is out there, just waiting to break cover and take its place. Our minds start to play tricks with us again, like two entities vying for possession of our souls. The voice of good sense and pragmatism whispers earnestly, keep the one you have. It's served you well. It does everything you want it to. You loved it when you bought it. You'll only lose money again if you change, and it won't make you any happier. Yet the second the voice of reason completes its first cycle of persuasion, the voice of temptation dives in, as if at volume 11 on a Marshall lamp. Go on, you only live once. Carpe diem. You know you want it. It'll breathe new life into your passion. You can afford it with a little effort. It's bound to be better. After all, you've seen all the YouTube reviews several times over. It'll make you happy. Well, yes, it will make you happy for a few weeks or months, maybe even years. But as sure as the Beethian wheel turns, we will one day come full circle and yearn once more for the next acquisition. Only our tenure in this world will dictate that machine which became our last one. And of course, this insanity, this most intoxicating of afflictions, is fueled, modulated and ultimately conditioned through endless streams of media advertising and exposure, cleverly designed to ensure that our addictions continue to feed the revolving doors of the great manufacturing machine and its wealthy overlords. But what's the relevance of the Beethian wheel just referred to? Well, Boethius was a 6th century philosopher and a Roman senator, and he was incarcerated and sentenced to death basically for pissing off his ruler, Theodoric. Whilst in prison awaiting execution, he wrote the now famous Consolation of Philosophy, in which he expanded upon an earlier concept known as the Rota Fortunae, or Wheel of Fortune, named after the goddess Fortuna, who randomly span a wheel to determine the ups and downs of mortals on Earth. Boethius expanded upon this by imagining life like a great water wheel. He wrote this: "Inconstancy is my very essence, says the wheel. Rise up on my spokes if you like, but don't complain when you're cast back down into the depths. Good times pass away, but then so do the bad. Mutability is our tragedy, but it's also our hope. The worst of times, like the best, are always passing away." Mutability is basically changeability, or the state of constant change. Now, it's an understandable position to take when you're facing execution, but it's such a profoundly true insight that I always return to it when trying to reason why life seems to be in an endless state of flux, when what seems like a good idea one day seems like the worst the next. And whereas we are hopefully not contemplating imminent death when we wrestle with our next choice of motorcycle, the principle described way back then by a lonely man in a cell holds true for all of life's decisions, including, of all things, changing your bike. Against such a backdrop, the decisions we've discussed are rightly reduced to trivial in status. So from all of this I draw one conclusion. Whatever streams of logic or reasoning we grapple with when it comes to deciding upon our latest shiny machine of joy, we should take a step back and recognise that the operations of logic, the internal debate, the external debate, the concerns around subsequent levels of satisfaction, they're not all that they seem. They are illusory. They are at best marginal to a much greater truth, the truth that all of life is change. This is the nature of all things, and of all things in nature. And whereas some of us will retain our chosen steeds for much or all of a lifetime, and some will change them on a whim like a set of clothes, and having due regard to the existence of all the possibilities in between, we can all be assured that the pursuit of new motorcycles is nothing more than the pursuit of happiness. And after all, what's wrong with that? It is this simple truth which applies to all of life's decisions, however big or small. It's the ultimate reductionist position to take. The pursuit of happiness is the life credo of all humans, and whether we achieve it or not, or to what extent we achieve it over a lifetime, doesn't alter the fact that it will always produce mixed fortunes. So I say, if you are minded to get that forever bike yet again, and are well placed to do so, then cast aside the debating and carpe diem. Seize the moment with both hands and leave the rest to history. Rise up on my spokes if you like, but don't complain when you're cast back down into the depths. Good times pass away, but then so do the bad. Mutability is our tragedy, but it's also our hope. The worst of times, like the best, are always passing away.